So we want to welcome everybody. Come on in. We're going to get started. Glad to see everybody. My name is Steve Westley. I've been active in California politics for the last 40 years. In 2002, I was elected controller and chief financial officer of the state of California, the world's fifth largest economy. I ran for governor as a Democrat in 2006. I lost by 4 points. My wife was delighted. I came back to Silicon Valley and founded one of the largest venture firms in the sustainability area. What we're going to do today, I think, is going to be a fascinating discussion. I'm going to provide a quick level setting of what's going on in the state of California, what is working, what's not, and how we fix it. Then we're going to jump into a fireside chat with a person I believe is one of the most thoughtful voices on California public policy and politics, and that is Dan Schnur. He is a distinguished faculty member at USC and Cal Berkeley. Not easy to pull off that one. He's run for statewide office himself. He's a registered independent, thoughtful writer, really knows politics as well as anybody. And what I'm going to do is after I give you this quick level set fireside chat, then we're going to come to you. And we're going to spend the last half of this giving you a chance to ask questions. What does it take to make California all it can be? What's going wrong? How do we fix it? Why is it not working? So with that, I'm going to jump right in. A lot of people love to say the wheels are coming off in California. The place is a mess. Not true. There is no state in the union, no country on the planet that would not change its place with California. By the way, you're welcome to take any pictures, and if you want, give me your card, and I'll send you the whole darn presentation. Or you can do both. Ponder this. Of the 10 largest market cap companies in the world, the most successful, the biggest, 5 are in California. 0 in Europe. 0 in New York. We are leading the world. Look at this. We are the world's 5th largest economy. Within the next quarter or two, we are about to move up and displace Germany as the world's 4th largest economy. Why? Because their auto industry is crumbling. They did not get the memo about the future. And what's shocking here is most people don't understand Germany, 83 million people. California, 39 million. The average California worker is twice as productive as the most successful Western European economies. We have a lot going for us. On top of all this, we're the global innovation leader. The challenge is our education is a mess, K through 12. We rank 40th in math, 37th in English. This is a disgrace. It would be malpractice in most businesses. Wealthiest state, worst performance. We've got huge, I don't need to tell you, especially in Santa Monica, homelessness and housing problems. To build a home in California costs close to twice the national average. That is not a progressive thing to be proud of. And third, on business climate, and again, I'm a lifelong Democrat here, our business climate is failing. We rank statistically 51st out of 50 states. How is this possible? They count Puerto Rico, and we're behind them. We're behind everybody. And this is not a Democrat versus Republican. We rank dead last. And that means people and companies are moving out of the state today at record numbers. I will show you the data. And that's not a progressive thing, because it means there's less money for public education, healthcare, and all the things we care about. So those are the problems. I just want you to see here, because I want to level set with the numbers. What's going on here? That green line, that is how much we have increased education per student on a percentage basis over the last decade. The gray line, it's always key to do the comparison, that's inflation. So like we're above and beyond inflation and in education spending by a dramatic amount, and the scores are in orange or blue. This is like the New York Yankees pay cap and finishing last place, folks. So these are the things we need to fix. Home building. Every candidate for political office stands up and says, home building will be my #1 priority. Number one, we've got to build more home building, bring prices down for young people, poor people. And this black line is what you have to be each year just to break even. But we're not at break even. And we're underbuilding every year. I assume you all know this because you're voting and paying attention. Every year, our housing problem is worse. Elected officials saying it's their #1 priority. What's the disconnect? I'm going to give you the quick answer, and remember, I'm a lifelong Democrat. The Democrats control the legislature. They all talk a good game on housing, but there's two big issues you need to get over, something called CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, and something called prevailing wage. Until you change those two things, you don't build more housing. And unfortunately, if you're a Democratic office holder, I've been one, by the time you piss off the environmentalists and labor unions, you may not be around for your next term. That's why people like you need to pay attention if you want to see change. But these are the numbers. This is what we're up against. This is what we have to fix. Now, I want to talk a little bit about business climate. This is one of the biggest issues for the egress of people in the state. And again, I'm not a right-winger by any means, and I don't want us to be model California around South Dakota or Wyoming. That's not a winner. They don't have world-class universities. They don't have the great things we have. But I'd also submit to you, we don't have to have an income tax rate that is 50% higher than New York. Do we? And by the way, those states like Washington State, Florida, these are not terrible places, and they managed to get by with zero. Now, they do a little bit of financial accounting, and they charge more for business taxes and so on. But I just wanted you to see the facts of how California, the greatest state in the world, the global innovation leader, is underperforming. Why? Largely because the special interests are paying attention, and we're not. So I'm just going to show you two last slides and then throw it over. If you don't believe me about wealthy people who are saying, gee whiz, why am I paying, forget more taxes than any other state, but 50% more than the people in New York, that's a pretty blue state. We're even ahead of Massachusetts. Who's leaving the state faster than anybody? Well, it's the highest net income earners. Some of you may know this story, but Elon Musk left the state. Now, most of us aren't crying about that, but you should be crying about the fact he paid $2.6 billion in state taxes that year. And who's picking it up? Thank you, us. So you want to hang on to your highest net earners, even if you're on the progressive end of the spectrum. Last point here, I want to end on a positive note. Now we're going to turn over to Dan. I've created a group called the 21st Century Alliance that's focused on fixing these issues, and we'll talk about how you do it. But there are states that get it together and fix things. Evidence, what they call the Mississippi miracle. Mississippi, chronically, the 49th, 50th, poorest state in the entire country, all gets together and says, about 8 years ago, we are tired of being the laughingstock of the country. We're going to get serious about data-driven improvements in education. It all starts with making sure that every child can read at grade level by 4th grade. If you can't read by 4th grade, you are not going to catch up in biology, algebra, and all the other things you're expected to do. Mississippi goes from being 45th in the country, blows by California, the largest budget per capita in the country, and is now number 2. We can do the same thing. We're working with Marshall Tuck and other legislators to bring the Science of Reading bill forward in the legislature this year to get serious about fixing California's problems. What does it take to do? I'll give you the shorthand answer. You've got to have a political action committee. We call it a courage committee, so you help elected officials do the right thing and give them the courage that they won't be primaried. You need to have lobbyists, and you need to show up with an army of like people, and that's where you come in. I hope that was helpful. Dan, you've been involved in public office and politics for 30 years, I think, that I've known you. What are the one or two things that I touched on here that jumped to mind for you and that should be on the top of their minds to fix some of the problems in Sacramento?
The first thing that I note, Steve, and thank you all for letting us join you here today. I'm heartened that this many people are interested in a conversation about California's future. And I'm a little bit daunted that we have 19 and a half minutes to fix it. So that might be a bit challenging.
You could do it.
What struck me more than anything else was that last slide. I have nothing against Mississippi, and I applaud the work that they've done. Steve, you referred briefly to science-based learning, and in particular what the state of Mississippi did is they implemented a program called phonics reading, which, for reasons that we can get into a bit later if you like, has proven over the years to be far more successful, particularly for at-risk children to succeed. But the other thing they did, and we can come back to this, Steve, if you like, is accountability. Steve cited an array of testing results for you. But I'd like to go a step further on those testing results and give you a better sense, not of what we're measuring, but even before that, how we're measuring it. Currently, every California 4th and 8th grader takes a required standardized test in reading, in science, and in math. And you saw the results here. But let's talk about the assessment. There are 4 standards that are applied in assessing these students' academic work. The 4 standards are as follows: standard exceeded, standard met, standard nearly met, standard not met. So I think you would agree that sounds more than a bit amorphous. And if you were to grade your employees on a scale like that, there would not only be precious little incentive for improvement, but there'd be even less way of determining which of your employees was succeeding and which wasn't. But let's take this a step further. Our State Board of Education has now proposed a new set of 4 standards as follows: advanced, proficient, foundational, and finally, inconsistent. And we have one member of our State Board of Education who actually thinks that inconsistent is a bit too negative. So they would suggest instead that 4th category simply being labeled as developing. Advanced, proficient, foundational, and developing. And just last week, they began to consider another alternative for standards. These are as follows: advanced, proficient, basic, below basic. So even before we talk about what our students are learning, once we understand that there's a system in place almost specifically and almost intentionally designed to keep us from knowing what they're learning, it becomes a lot easier to see that a state like Mississippi that has implemented more rigorous accountability standards has rocketed up these charts so quickly.
So we only have a half hour here, and what I'd love to do is just do a quick maybe lightning round to ask you a few questions I know you've thought about, and then in about 3 minutes come back to you for any questions you might have. So, Dan, I think a lot of people here kind of know what the answers are, and you're wondering, why aren't we doing them, like building more housing? What do you think is the #1 issue that's holding our legislature back from doing the right things, even when the answer is pretty apparent?
Okay. So the New York sociologist Jonathan Haidt likes to say that the worst number of political parties to have is 1. He says the second worst number of political parties to have is 2, because it forces us into a binary set of choices, which does not reflect any other set of choices we make in our professional or personal lives. I tell my students about what it was like having 3 television networks, 5 buttons on the car radio. I might as well be talking to them about the butter churn and the 8-track tape player. The idea of a finite number of choices is just inconceivable to them. Yet that's the way our political system works. So the place where we tend to end up is thinking, well, let's just start a third party. The problem there is you might want to start a third party that is socially progressive and economically conservative. You might want to start a third party that is socially conservative and socially liberal. So we all think the idea of a third party is okay, but it doesn't really solve anything. So here in California, the deep blue state, I would argue to you that there are 2 political parties. As it happens, they are both Democratic parties. One is a coastal party that is very progressive on both social and cultural issues and economic policy on one hand, and then another that tends to be still very socially progressive, but more business and jobs creation oriented on economic policy. And so what I think, at least here in California, what we need to do is build back the center within both parties. We have a Democratic Party that is captive to its most progressive members, a Republican Party that's captive to its most conservative members. And rather than trying to start this mythical, magical third party, realize that there's smart people in both parties who, with the right type of consistent support, can steer us toward a more accountable system in education and toward addressing some of the housing and tax challenges that you talked about.
That is a great point. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and then we're going to throw it open to you for some questions. A realpolitik story that I think is going to explain a little bit about why politics functions like it does in Sacramento. About 40 years ago, there's a very famous guy, very astute political guy in Sacramento named Don Novi. And he was a lobbyist. And there's a continuum in law enforcement. You know, the highway patrol, and there's well-paid people on the top, and sheriffs, and you all know who's in the bottom of the continuum, status-wise and pay? California prison guards. And they were treated terribly. Worst paid, most dangerous job, killed on duty. It sucked. And Don came into these people at rock bottom and said, would you like me to fix your terrible situation? Would you like me to make you one of the most powerful forces in Sacramento? I said, great. You know, those people, the teachers' union, super powerful, regarded as the most powerful force. A lot of teachers, they charge 1% of the union fees. That's old world. If you give me 3% of your wages, that's a lot, folks, when you're not making much money. I will make you the highest paid members of law enforcement, the most feared group in Sacramento. Would you take that deal? That is why the California Corrections Officers Association is one of the most powerful forces. Money in politics matters. And a lot of you are saying, that's terrible. I like these people. They were supposed to do the common good. Well, yeah. But how many of you want to lose your job? Not so many. Legislators aren't so different. And what happened is, almost overnight, this guy, Don Novi, transferred the power continuum in Sacramento such that virtually every year for the last 20 years, as you look at a percentage of the budget, each year the prison guards get paid a little more, even though there's 1/3 fewer people in California prisons today than there were a decade ago. And each year the UC budget, percentage-wise, goes down, prison guards get more. You're all in favor of that, right? More for the prisons, less for, no. But who's winning this battle? The people that are paying attention to politics in Sacramento, showing up with the money. This is what we're trying to fix for today. So I just want to give you that realpolitik story. I'm going to give you a quick word, and then we're going to jump into questions.
So just to build on what Steve is saying, in politics, and this does not surprise anyone here, we know that money matters, and we know that time investment matters. So resources are key. But in addition to resources is the number of people who stay involved on a regular basis. The prison guards are in Sacramento and the state capitol very regularly. So are the teachers, so are any number of interests across the state, some of which you strongly support, some of which you don't. The challenge that the business community has, the challenge that the jobs creators have, is you're too busy running your businesses. And you're too busy creating jobs. And so what that means is that for an interest to be heard in Sacramento, it needs three things. It needs a political action committee to provide the money that Steve is talking about. It needs an ongoing lobbying presence. But third, it needs an army of supporters. It needs women and men who are willing to walk the halls in Sacramento and, for that matter, in Washington, even if it means taking their time away from their businesses to do it. I'll give a story that predates Steve's about the prison guards. In 1998, there were three initiatives on the ballot here in California. And for those of you in the tech sector with long memories, you may remember that these are three initiatives that, if they had passed, would have made it far, far easier for shareholders to sue the companies in which they invested. The tech sector, which had never really been involved politically, mobilized in an unprecedented way. They raised millions of dollars. They organized from CEOs to line workers. They all got involved. And they beat the thing. So a week after the election, I was asked to give a talk in Silicon Valley, and I congratulated them. I said, I want to congratulate you. You recognized a threat. You saw the menace it presented to your businesses, into our economy. You raised $1 trillion, maybe not quite $1 trillion, but a lot. You fought hard nonstop for a year, and you beat these initiatives. And now you are back exactly where you were 1 year ago today. If you ran your business that way, you'd fail. If you expect a different response, if you a different outcome from being involved in the political process sporadically, you're fooling yourself. And so again, not just the money, not just the lobbyists, but the consistent attention. And this is, Steve, one of the things I admire most about what you're doing with your 21st Century Alliance is bringing really smart job creators into the process and making sure that our state lawmakers, who may not have had, who almost certainly have not had the experience and background that you have, get a much more visceral understanding about what it takes to create and keep jobs in California than they might otherwise.
With that, let me just summarize it all to say, money does matter in Sacramento, but it's not because they're so much different than you. They just want to keep their jobs like you. The second thing is, in a democracy, it's just like a muscle. You're either a participant or you're a victim. Take it from me, you're much better being a participant, and the more you exercise that muscle, the better state we're going to have. Let's jump over to questions. Who wants to ask a question? Anything goes, don't hold back. Sir, here, and then the gentleman back there, and then this fellow right here. Sir. Loud? So I'm going to repeat all the questions. Question is, what about the future of Prop 13? This prevents us from raising taxes on homes more than a certain amount each year. I want to just tell you, running for political office, as I have, when you go to Palo Alto, Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, you know, we're all good liberals. You've got to fix Prop 13. Yesterday, unanimous. And you go out and campaign in the other 57 counties of the state, and they say, if you touch Prop 13, I will kill you. So that's kind of the conundrum. Over time, what I want all of you to recognize, and I'm delighted to see how many people there here are today, and a lot of you are younger, what Prop 13 really is a disproportionate tax on younger people who pay the most for buying a home, and a lot of the older people who've been in a home. I've had our home for 27 years. God bless you for subsidizing me. It's not fair. It is really a tax on younger people. That is why I want you to be active. Probably not the votes yet to change that. Someday it may be fixed. Dan, anything you'd say about Prop 13?
Just very quickly, because we're low on time, the greatest challenge to California's housing crisis, as we all know, is affordability, which means if you lift the ceiling on property taxes, the cost of housing then increases. And so therefore, housing becomes even less affordable as time passes. So I think your broader question, your broader point is the right one. I would say restructuring California's tax system, perhaps to rely less on goods and more on services, because service provision has become such a greater part of our economy, is a way of addressing the kind of injustices and inequalities you're talking about. I'd be reluctant to, even in the short run, allow housing costs to go up because property taxes drive them upward.
Yeah. Again, on this housing issue, number one thing to do with housing, you must build more housing. There's a big opportunity now as you rebuild in Malibu. Especially if you're a young person, the way to get lower cost housing is to build more of it and to reduce some of the regulations. The gentleman right here with the beard.
Okay, so just to clarify, for those of you who didn't hear the gentleman's question, he congratulated us on the brilliance of our presentation, and he said we're absolutely fascinated. It's a little embarrassing, sir. I wish he hadn't done that. But he then went on to ask, he said, Dan, you talked about the importance of spending, but why if spending money is that important, why aren't our schools doing better? And I just want to clarify, when I was talking about spending, as cynical as it sounds, I was actually talking about political spending in order to make sure that your voice is heard the way it deserves to. While spending on education is part of the solution, it's not the only part of the solution. And I think higher standards and reforms that don't cost a great deal of additional money have been what California's barriers are, or what California's barriers represent. So what I would say very quickly, for example, is Mississippi, because they employ those standards of accountability, are they spending more money than they used to? Sure. But just like you in your business, you don't spend money without measuring how effective it is or it isn't. To me, the spending, along with the accountability and the reform, becomes even more important. So I apologize for my lack of clarification. When I was talking about the importance of money, while it's helpful in schools, it's necessary in terms of political engagement. Was the obstacle to the accountability? I didn't come here as a partisan, but what I will say is that generally guardians of the status quo, primarily organized labor, like a system in which their members are not held accountable for the success or failure of their students. And because they not only spend a great deal of money and employ a great number of lobbyists, but because they're much more regularly and consistently involved than the reform community and job creators, they tend to get their way.
I want to get in a few more questions. Just the short answer is there's been a massive disconnect in California between being progressive and that meaning you can't have any accountability. I'm all in favor of environmental standards and progressive social issues, but that does not mean we can't have the highest standards for our schools, or we can't push to have the lowest cost housing. Do not accept that disconnect. If you're a progressive, great. You can still demand accountability. We have this gentleman here, and then there was someone else over this fellow right here. 2 more questions. We'll give you shorter answers. Go. Let me give it real quick. So the question is, what about labor unions? How do you sort of fix that? Look, labor unions are like any other group, including companies. They're looking out for the good of their members, not necessarily the good of the whole. What I will tell you is directionally, there are labor unions, like the building trades in some cases, but especially the carpenters, where they're focused on productivity, just exactly the accountability we're talking about. They have different grades of carpenters. You get people who are more productive, and they get paid more. That tends to work well. That's what happens in the German labor movement. We need to kind of get back to that as opposed to just saying every year we need to raise the prevailing wage or the minimum wage again and again and again. I mean, there's a deal here in LA to bring it up to $30. That may end up losing more jobs than it actually helps.
And what I'll add very, very quickly is that the answer for the job creators community is not to get rid of organized labor, but when it comes to political involvement, to imitate them and make sure that your voices are heard on as consistent a basis. They're exercising their First Amendment right. There's nothing to prevent you from doing the same thing.
Last question. This gentleman here will give you short answers, and we're going to be on time. Yeah. So really quickly, we're about to see an explosion of data centers because of the growth of AI. The primary reason these are going out of state is we have some of the highest energy costs in the country. We need to fix that. That is the subject of the presentation. I'm going to give it 2:30. Come back for that. but a lot of the data centers of the country are going to Virginia, Texas, Arizona, and that's a shame. Anything quick on AI?
That was shameless but impressive. What I'll tell you is the reason California has been the technology capital of the country and the world for so many years is because of our historic investment in higher education. That investment is waning. We're living on the past. To me, what was the most interesting and important thing about the first slide that Steve showed was not that 5 out of the 10 largest grossing companies in the world are based in California, but 5 out of the 10 largest tech companies in the world are not based here. And we are on the wrong end of a trend that's moving away from us until we right the problems in our system of K-12 and higher education.
Thank you. We're delighted to have so many people. I hope this was helpful. Thank you.